Let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a single packed day on Capitol Hill, June 9, 2025. We've got a whole stack of sources here, everything from detailed legislative documents and committee reports to expert analyses and floor transcripts, giving us this really granular, sort of fly-on-the-wall perspective of what was going down in the U.S. House and Senate.
That's right. Our mission is to go through this material and pull out the absolute most important nuggets and insights. We want to help you understand the real dynamics at play, that mix of, essential routine legislative work,
Right.
combined with significant policy battles and some truly intense political clashes that marked this specific day.
Think of it as your shortcut to being well-informed about how American governance actually functions, complete with surprising details and connections that might just, make you see things a little differently.
We'll explore moments where there was surprising consensus, then sharp turns into deep divisions on critical issues, dive into debates around important executive nominations, and even unpack some very serious allegations that were raised right there on the floor.
So settle in. We're diving right into the heart of June 9th, 2025. Let's start in the House. Our sources show that the House had a really busy legislative schedule, managing to pass quite a few bills with broad agreement, but also hitting some really sharp disagreements on other fronts.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to see the range. Many bills passed under suspension of the rules, which is typically used for non-controversial items, signaling broad bipartisan support.
Okay, so the stuff most people agree on.
Exactly. The sources highlight things like strengthening national security and public safety measures, bolstering the U.S. maritime industry with something called the American Cargo for American Ships Act, enhancing Coast Guard capabilities against drug trafficking, and addressing security concerns around foreign-made port crane equipment.
And also bills aimed at just, making things work better, like mandatory baby-changing tables on new Amtrak trains. That's the Baby Changing on Board Act.
Yeah.
Or honoring history by designating the House Press Gallery, the Frederick Douglass Press Gallery. Plus, regulatory transparency for the TVA.
Exactly. These kinds of measures often pass relatively quietly, but they're essential parts of the legislative machinery.
Yeah.
We also saw action on compressed gas cylinder safety, International Boundary and Water Commission Authority, and even mandatory workplace training for House staff, and several small business administration bills advanced.
So you've got this stream of bipartisan agreement on specific, often practical matters, but then, as the sources show, you hit these partisan flashpoints. And the debates around anti-Semitism on this day are a prime example. Two different resolutions were considered, and the contrast is striking.
It really is. One, HRES 481, broadly condemning the rise in ideologically motivated attacks, passed with near unanimous support 400-0 with two present.
Wow.
That's a moment where the House showed clear, unified condemnation.
Okay, overwhelming support there. But the other one, HRES 488, which specifically denounced the Boulder attack, had a much more divided vote, 280 to 113, with 6 members voting present.
Right.
Why such a difference on seemingly related topics?
That's where the text, as highlighted by the sources, becomes crucial. HRES 488 included specific details about the perpetrator's immigration status and law enforcement contacts. Critically, the sources note it was explicitly linked by some members to a broader Republican policy platform on immigration and sanctuary policies.
So one resolution was about condemning anti-Semitism broadly, while the other seemed to use a specific tragedy to advance arguments on, unrelated policy debates like immigration.
Precisely. And the sources point out that Democratic representatives criticized HRES 488 not only for using the tragedy this way, but also for alleged factual inaccuracies in its text and for mentioning INE contacts while omitting recognition of efforts by local police and the FBI. It's a powerful illustration of how even a shared tragedy can be framed and debated through fundamentally different partisan lenses, potentially undermining that initial moment of unity.
Yeah.
The specific language and emphasis really revealed distinct political priorities and strategies at play.
Beyond the formal votes, members also used floor time during morning hour debates and one-minute speeches to air a whole range of concerns. What did the sources show they were talking about?
It was a mix. Republicans were advocating for specific spending cuts they wanted, like clawing back funds for things they saw as wasteful net zero cities in Mexico or Rocky Sesame Street, or specific examples mentioned in the context of a DOGE rescissions package.
Right.
They pushed for increased penalties for fentanyl traffickers and highlighted the economic contributions of the dairy industry.
And Democrats pushed back, framing their arguments differently.
Yes. They criticized proposed cuts to healthcare and food assistance programs like SNAP, arguing these would hurt families and were designed to fund tax breaks for the wealthy. They also voiced strong opposition to cuts to science funding, like the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowship Program, arguing it's a reckless assault on science that damages American innovation against rivals like China.
It wasn't just national policy either. Local issues got brought to the national stage.
Right. You saw Republicans attributing things like the protests in Los Angeles to California's radical political leadership, explicitly linking it to open border and sanctuary policies. Democrats, while condemning violence, criticized the administration's response, seeing it as politicizing the military and diverting resources when state and local officials hadn't even requested National Guard troops.
Interesting.
There were also specific concerns raised about FEMA's hurricane preparedness and proposed cuts to Amtrak.
And one specific notable moment the sources highlighted, a special order hour dedicated to men's health, co-anchored by members as part of a Congressional Black Caucus Hour.
Yes, it focused on the importance of preventive care, addressing the stigma men face in seeking medical help, particularly for mental health.
Right, that's crucial.
And shining a light on health disparities faced by Black men, like higher rates of prostate cancer. They also used the time to criticize proposed Medicaid cuts in a large bill, arguing these would undermine healthcare access and public health infrastructure, advocating for a more holistic approach.
So using that dedicated time to focus on a specific policy area.
Exactly. It shows a specific policy focus being championed through dedicated floor time.
Okay, let's shift gears and move over to the Senate. The sources here paint a picture of intense procedural maneuvering and some truly high-stakes debates on policy and executive power.
They really do. The Senate calendar on this day involves some intricate steps around a key financial bill, S. 1582, known as the Stablecoins Act.
Stablecoins, okay.
We're talking about a lot of procedural back and forth withdrawing and introducing amendments, a substitute amendment being filed, multiple cloture motions on amendments, and the underlying bill itself.
That sounds like a lot of technical steps. What does that kind of complex procedural dance tell us about the bill or the dynamics surrounding it on this particular day?
Well, it's a critical indicator that this wasn't just a straight up or down vote waiting to happen.
Right.
This level of procedural complexity, according to the sources, signals intense strategic efforts to shape the final form of the bill or even control its passage. It highlights that the legislative process in the Senate is just as much about the strategic use of parliamentary tools to gain leverage or block opponents as it is about the policy itself. They weren't just debating the substance, they were fighting over how the substance would even be considered.
Interesting. Beyond the complex bill process, the Senate also tackled executive nominations. While some moved forward, like Brett Shumet for Assistant Attorney General, the nomination of David Fatohi for EPA Deputy Administrator really sparked a major conflict, according to the sources.
It certainly did. He was eventually confirmed after a cloture vote, but the debate surrounding him was sharp. Senator Whitehouse, for example, vehemently opposed the nomination, labeling Fatohi 100% on the side of the polluters.
100% on the side of the polluters. That's strong language. What specific points did he raise from the source material?
Senator Whitehouse cited Fatohi's career defending major corporations against environmental violations, including allegations of dumping PFAS into drinking water, poisoning salmon, and illegal sulfur dioxide emissions.
Wow.
He specifically alleged that during his time as acting general counsel at the EPA in the first Trump administration, Fatohi worked to repeal regulations on CO2 and methane emissions and lead and copper in drinking water.
Okay.
He framed this as serving the poisonous agenda of President Trump's fossil fuel donors and trying to rescind the scientific finding that greenhouse gases endanger public health.
Wow, presenting him as actively working against environmental protection while at the agency, but there was support for the nomination as well, right?
Yes, Senator Capito, chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, strongly supported him. She described Fatohi as well-qualified and equipped, arguing he was essential for returning the agency to its core mission and moving away from what she called extreme regulations that threatened the power grid and American competitiveness. She emphasized his extensive environmental law experience and commitment to cooperative federalism, suggesting his experience advising entities on compliance offered a valuable perspective.
So this nomination debate really is a microcosm of the broader national struggle over the EPA's role, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Is it primarily an environmental watchdog or an agency that needs to balance regulation with economic impacts?
Absolutely. The source material clearly shows this fundamental philosophical divide playing out directly in the debate over a single individual's fitness to serve.
And speaking of using nominations as leverage,
Yes.
the sources also highlighted Senator Rosen of Nevada announcing her intent to object to 4 Commerce Department nominations, explicitly linking her objection to the Trump administration's early decision to rescind Nevada's broadband funding approval.
So using confirmation power to exert pressure on the executive branch over an unrelated policy dispute critical to her state.
Exactly. That's a clear example of Senate procedure in action.
Precisely. Now, while nominations and procedural battles were happening, the most intense clashes of the day, according to our sources, revolved around major policy initiatives and some very serious allegations concerning executive conduct.
Okay, let's dive into the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This seems to have been a central point of extremely sharp disagreement.
It was. The sources detail Senate Majority Leader Thune strongly supporting it, presenting it as crucial for achieving significant savings and safeguarding essential programs like Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare within an America First agenda.
Okay.
He highlighted provisions for border security, pro-family tax policies, energy independence, and national security.
And his key argument for passing it quickly.
He warned that failure to pass it would result in a substantial $2.6 trillion tax increase. He even gave a specific example from the source, detailing the impact on a typical family of 4 earning $80,000 annually, facing an additional $1,700 in taxes. He explicitly accused Democratic opposition of fighting against tax relief and prioritizing illegal aliens and able-bodied adults who refuse to work, remaining on Medicaid.
So framing it as tax relief versus potential increases and tying opposition to specific groups, how did the minority leader, Senator Durbin, respond?
He had a dramatically different perspective, according to the sources. He questioned the urgency and speed of the process and expressed deep concern about the bill's impact on health care. Citing a Congressional Budget Office report, he stated the bill would eliminate health insurance coverage for 16 million Americans.
16 million Americans losing health insurance. I mean, that's a staggering number cited by the source.
It is, and he detailed potential state-specific impacts cited in the report. Durbin argued that the alleged financial savings would disproportionately benefit the wealthiest Americans, citing the CBO, finding that the top 0.1% of wage earners would receive an annual tax break of $400,000.
$400,000.
While minimum wage earners would only see about a $20 monthly reduction. He predicted devastating effects on hospitals, especially rural ones, and nursing homes, and argued families would face increased costs across energy, mortgages, and loans, forecasting a $2,500 increase in household costs due to tariffs included in the bill. He labeled the bill a big, beautiful betrayal.
That's a stark contrast. One side presenting it as essential savings and tax relief, protecting key programs, the other as devastating healthcare cuts that benefit the wealthy at the expense of ordinary families and vulnerable populations.
It's a clear illustration from the sources of a fundamental ideological clash over fiscal policy, its impact on social safety nets, and the very question of who benefits and loses from major legislative changes. It's not just about the numbers,
Right, that's about the interpretation.
It's about the deeply contested interpretation of the real-world impact and the distribution of economic burdens and benefits.
Senator Durbin also commented on the Los Angeles protests, which we saw came up in the House debates as well. What did his remarks add based on the source material?
Well, while condemning the violence, his sharp criticism, according to the sources, was aimed squarely at President Trump's response. Durbin accused the administration of manipulating these protests as an excuse to politicize the military and diverting resources from disaster relief and national security. He noted that state and local officials hadn't requested the National Guard troops President Trump deployed and cited the California governor's concern it risked escalating the situation.
He drew a historical parallel, too.
Yes, he specifically contrasted it with President Lyndon B. Johnson's 1965 deployment of the National Guard to protect civil rights demonstrators in Alabama.
Interesting comparison.
Durbin also quoted President Trump's social media posts describing Los Angeles as invaded and occupied, and explicitly linking it to a migrant invasion, which Durbin argued clearly politicized the unrest. And he contrasted FBI Director Kash Patel's statement, "Hit a cop, you're going to jail," with President Trump's blanket pardon for January 6 defendants who assaulted police, suggesting the administration's law and order rhetoric was applied selectively
Right.
and prioritized mass migration over other public safety concerns.
So, according to the sources, this was presented as executive action potentially driven by a political agenda rather than a consistent approach to public safety or national security.
Exactly. And on the topic of executive actions and potential abuses of power, the sources detail Senator Murphy raising some very serious and specific allegations regarding foreign policy and personal financial gain.
This sounds like potentially significant news from that day. What exactly did the sources say Senator Murphy alleged?
Senator Murphy alleged that Donald Trump was abusing that authority to enrich himself and his family, stating he was doing so publicly, brazenly, out in the open.
Okay.
He detailed reports indicating that the White House had requested a $400 million luxury jet from the government of Qatar.
A $400 million luxury jet from a foreign government. That detail alone is quite striking.
It is. The sources state Senator Murphy described it as the world's most luxurious private jet, complete with extensive amenities, and alleged the plan was for it to ultimately become Trump's personal property after only briefly passing through U.S. government hands.
And he characterized this as illegal.
Yes, according to the sources, Senator Murphy called this unprecedented and illegal, alleging it was a violation of the Constitution's Emoluments Clause.
Right, the Emoluments Clause.
Which is designed to prevent a president from receiving gifts or benefits from foreign nations. He suggested Qatar felt compelled due to Trump's immense leverage, particularly after experiencing regional isolation during his first term, when Saudi Arabia and the UAE imposed a blockade with Trump's implicit consent. He also linked this alleged gift directly to Qatar's desire to purchase sensitive MQ-9 Reaper drones, America's most lethal armed drones, a technology previously deemed too volatile for the region.
So, connecting the alleged gift to specific foreign policy outcomes. And the allegations didn't end there regarding other countries.
No. Senator Murphy further alleged that U.S. foreign policy was effectively for sale.
For sale?
Yes. He specifically cited a $2 billion investment by an Emirati government-backed firm into Trump's new stablecoin, which he stated significantly inflated Trump's personal wealth.
$2 billion.
He pointed to a perceived conflict of interest, noting that the stablecoin company's co-founder is the son of Trump's top Middle East advisor, suggesting, according to the source, a direct link between the investment and Middle East policy decisions.
Linking this substantial investment to specific policy changes.
That was the core of the allegation from the source material. And Murphy claimed that in return for these alleged financial benefits, the UAE sought and received the lifting of restrictions on advanced U.S. computer chips, which power AI systems, and the sale of Chinook helicopters without conditions on their involvement in the Sudan civil war.
Those are extraordinarily serious claims based on what was reported.
They are. Senator Murphy characterized these alleged actions, as detailed in the sources, as the most brazenly corrupt act in the history of the American presidency. Wow. He specifically urged senators to block the arms sales to Qatar and the UAE in an effort to prevent further alleged corruption, emphasizing that American foreign policy should not be, in his words, for sale.
It is absolutely crucial to reiterate, as reported in the source material, that these are allegations raised by a senator on the floor.
Yes, definitely.
But they certainly raise profound questions, according to the sources, about the integrity of foreign policy decision-making and potential constitutional issues.
And while all this high-stakes drama was unfolding, the Senate also received a constant flow of routine executive communications and reports from federal departments and agencies.
Right, the background hum of government.
Exactly. That underscores that even on a dramatic day, the fundamental work continues behind the scenes. You see reports ranging from annual performance reviews and procurement contract awards to numerous inspector general reports across different departments. Notifications regarding arms exports and acting officer designations were also received.
So the paperwork still flows.
It does. The House, for example, published routine expenditure reports for official foreign travel, including delegations to Italy and the Middle East, which the source notes as reflecting a commitment to transparency.
Okay.
And looking ahead, scheduled committee meetings in both chambers were extensive, covering everything from nominations for agencies like NIH and FAA to budget estimates, military posture reviews, and hearings on complex issues like digital assets and the privacy implications of a major bankruptcy. This demonstrates the sheer breadth of ongoing legislative and oversight work.
So looking back at June 9, 2025, through the lens of our sources, it really wasn't just another ordinary day in Washington.
Not at all. We saw the essential gears of government turning passing routine bills on everything from national security technology to baby-changing tables.
Right. alongside moments of genuine bipartisan unity, like the broad condemnation of antisemitism.
But those moments were immediately contrasted with the deep ideological divides, whether it was on how to address a domestic tragedy or the fundamental disagreements on the direction and impact of major financial legislation and the role of regulatory agencies like the EPA.
And critically, the day included significant allegations raised right there on the Senate floor, questioning the politicization of law enforcement responses and the very integrity of foreign relations, linking policy outcomes directly to alleged personal financial interests.
These events, captured from the micro level of a specific bill vote to the macro level of those serious allegations, really show the complex, often contentious, and sometimes surprising dynamics of American governance all playing out within a single 24-hour period. Understanding these specific actions, debates, and allegations from one day helps illuminate the persistent challenges of legislative compromise, the critical role of oversight, the strategic use of procedural power, and, the intense scrutiny surrounding executive power in our current political environment. What stands out to you from this deep dive into June 9, 2025?
And as you mull it over, consider this provocative thought drawn from the source material. How do the specific instances of partisan framing of tragedy, fundamental disagreements on fiscal policy impacting millions, and the serious allegations of trading foreign policy for personal gain collectively illustrate the complex and ever-present tension between principle, policy, and the pursuit of power in the U.S. Congress? It's certainly a lot to think about.